Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, we're going to check in with the president of the Pennsylvania State Education Association and get his view of public education in the state, and then the Pennsylvania Budget Secretary, Charles Zogby, what's in store for us for next year's state budget and some guidelines he's working on. We'll be back in a moment.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, we have a great show. We're going to get talk about public education a bit with the president of PSEA, Mike Crossey. He's sitting right across from me. And then we're going to have Secretary Charles Zogby. He's the architect of the Pennsylvania's budget. We get all these views on this show. We want different views. That's what it's all about. Now, I do research for a bunch of organizations. One of them is PSEA. We put that out. We don't hide anything on this show. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
All right, let's talk a little bit. You know, if you had to grade the public schools, you know, how they're doing in general, you know, we've had some budget cuts. The stimulus money's gone. Give us your sense of the state of public education in Pennsylvania.
Public education in Pennsylvania is doing great. We have problems. We have school districts. We actually have 144 buildings that have problems, and we need to work on those. We call them priority schools. But at the same time, overall, Pennsylvania public schools are doing fantastic. We're #1 in the nation in reading at the 8th grade level. We're 6th in the nation at the 4th grade level. We're also in the top 10 at 4th and 8th grade levels in mathematics instruction. 70% of the students in Pennsylvania go on to higher education or some sort of post-secondary training. So our public school system is doing fantastic. Now, we need to work on the schools that are struggling. And we have schools that are struggling. As I mentioned, there's 144 of them. Yeah. We've come out with a program called Solutions at Work to take care of those kind of problems. Unfortunately, the budget cuts that we had this coming year have consequences.
And the loss of the stimulus money played into that. I read some figures, a couple hundred teachers, you know, were either laid off or put on some kind of leave in various school districts. Has that been sort of uniform across the state? Now, there is some complaint about the formula, you know, that wealthier schools are better able to handle it, lay off fewer. What's your sense about that?
This budget definitely hurts the poorer schools, the urban schools, at a much higher degree. There's no doubt, but it's more than a couple hundred. According to a survey done by the Pennsylvania school business officials and the school administrators, they're estimating a total of 14,000 some teachers, school support professionals have been laid off this year, laid off or positions eliminated through attrition and retirements, early retirements. But this budget definitely harms school districts least able to handle the budget cuts more than some of the other school districts.
Yeah, let's talk. I mean, one of the things that I know that you know a lot about early childhood. You taught children with disability, I think, for a good bit of your career. One of the things that I've been reading is that if we put more money in pre-K, and particularly do education started earlier. I know that some people may not like that. They think, let kids be kids. You don't have to put them in school too early. But we find that that pays really tremendous dividends down the road in terms of people who, have a greater facility with English, have a greater ability to, master other kinds of skills that you need. Now, you're an expert on that. That's something you've spent a good bit of your career on. Is that your same sense?
It's just not my sense. It's research proven. Right. And research says that there is a multiple dollar return for every dollar invested in early childhood program, full-day kindergarten programs, and reduced class sizes at the earliest grades. There is no doubt. I mean, it saves us in problems with disabilities down the road. It saves us with behavior problems down the road. It increases dramatically achievement of students down the road.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about, you have a program, you call it Rewriting the Book on Public Education. Yes. You have a set of things that you think the state ought to be looking at. Let's talk, we'll get into it. We're going to run to a break, but let's get into a couple of what you call that Solutions at Work. There's a blueprint. Give us some of the sense about where your organization, teachers, would like to see this state go.
Absolutely. We need to work with the governor and the legislature on refunding education back to where it was, because these cuts hurt. The governor's budget cuts hurt public education tremendously. But talking about solutions at work, what we need to do is we need to have programs, positive parental involvement programs. We need to have alternative placements for students who are disruptive or violent in the classroom, so that all the children can learn to the best they can, and then at the same time set up a program for those children who are disruptive and need to be removed from the normal setting, and a program where they can still get an education that allows them to be successful going down the road. We can't just throw them away. Right. We need to have an alternative placement.
All right, we're going to run to a break. I want to talk a little bit about that because, look, I've been a college professor, and quite frankly, I've always said that's easier. I mean, you may have to, the subject matter may be a little more complex and involved, but teaching at the lower levels with, as you point out, with disruptive kids and family backgrounds, I want to explore that a little bit because I think that's an aspect of providing education that doesn't often get enough emphasis.
Sure.
All right, we'll be back. We're talking about, in this case, some solutions that could work to help the public education sector in our state. And then we'll have the Secretary of the Budget on to chat about the budget following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by ReconnectPA.org, supporting a comprehensive transportation funding solution, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're talking all things public education with Michael Crossey. He's the president of PSEA. Before I get back to this theme that I want to check in with you on about, not just struggling schools, but struggling kids, parents and, in families without a lot of parental support. That's a huge problem that the schools necessarily, didn't ask for. You have to deal with it. And I want to ask you about something that you call creating a culture of teaching excellence. In that you talk about reinvent teacher and principal evaluation systems. Talk about that a bit.
Absolutely. We know that as teachers, we know that the evaluation system in Pennsylvania's public schools doesn't work very well. A lot of times it's a drive-by. The principal will come in and sit and say, okay, you're doing a great job. Other times we need to rewrite the whole process. Right. And we're doing that. We have 4 of our members, 2 of our staff, 2 of our governance leaders working directly with the PDE, the Pennsylvania Department of Education, right, to work on a system that actually works. Mm-hmm. Principals need to be trained on how to evaluate. Oftentimes principals are good teachers who become principals in their schools, but they need to be trained on how to evaluate, how to truly become an instructional leader and how to improve education.
Do you think that outcome-based ought to be part of the criteria? And I've often wondered, we want to measure success somehow. Should the success be, can you read at a certain grade level? Have you, the students, I'm talking about a mastery of the subject matter, but teachers all fall into a complicated set of learning environments for the students that they face. I mean, some may, you may have better students to start with. Sure. You may have kids with, perhaps some kind of learning disabilities or family backgrounds that, right. I mean, I always thought that was pretty hard to get a handle on.
It is tremendously hard to get a handle on because teaching is as much an art as it is a science. Right. And and I've had students that I thought we were very successful with who were on the verge of dropping out, and we've got them to stay in school, and we got them to not be in the principal's office every day. And sometimes we measure success that way. Other times, you're going to measure it by achievement in certain tests, in certain areas of education.
Is your argument that that it needs to be a more sophisticated form of evaluation that looks at a lot more factors than just outcomes?
Absolutely. We call it multiple measures of instructional success. And
outcomes would be part of it.
Outcomes are part of it. There's no doubt about it. We need to look at, our students achieving. But the problem is it can't be based on a single test. One single test, one certain day of the year, and that's how effective the teacher is. That's not a fair or reasonable. Whatever tests you use have to be valid and reliable.
Yeah, in college classrooms, somebody would come in and sit down, listen to one lecture.
Right.
I often wondered, well, what can you get out of one lecture? And they're becoming a little more sophisticated even at the college level. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about is this variation in schools. As I said, some schools, maybe suburban schools with middle class, kids in them where they have a fairly solid support system. Then you have schools that can be rural as well as urban where it's a little more complex. The family backgrounds are different. They struggle a little bit. Some may have, learning deficiencies by the time they get to middle school that they've never caught up on. Is there some formula for dealing with these struggling schools that you would suggest?
There is no one size fits all, but you're right. The schools are a mirror of the community that they exist in. Right. 1 out of 5 children going to school now is in a family below the poverty line. We have students coming to school that have health issues. Right. We have students coming to school who are, looking, where's my next meal coming from? There's a lot of those other factors that go on in the school. In some districts, you actually have crime in the streets that you have to think about, and it comes into the school. So there is so much more of it. What we need to try to do as teachers and support professionals in our schools is how do we still reach every child? And that's our challenge. And that's why it's so complicated to come up with a system that actually works for every child or every teacher.
Well, look, thanks for coming on. We appreciate your insights onto this. All right, the Secretary of the Budget, I'm going to see if I can get him to break some news and tell us what the budget's going to be like for the state of Pennsylvania. Don't think so, but I will try when we return.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Welcome back to the program. Well, we have the Budget Secretary of the state of Pennsylvania, Charles Zogby, on the program. Secretary Zogby, welcome. All right, now listen, I said I was going to try to weasel some information out of you about the budget. Give us your, and I know I want to talk about these policy guidelines. We'll do that in due course.
Sure.
What's the budget situation? Give us an update.
Well, Terry, last year the governor and the General Assembly, we delivered an on-time budget, a balanced budget, getting out of a $4.2 billion deficit. We did that by cutting spending by about 4%, about $1.2 billion. We certified a budget estimate in June, and it seems like no sooner did we put the current year budget to rest than we saw sort of the underpinnings, the foundation on which we built it, begin to crumble. Gross domestic products, economic growth estimates, for instance, that we had built in 2 months later had been cut in half. We came $63 million short in revenues in August. And we still have a couple days left this month, but we're probably looking at least another $100 million plus down. Now, some of that is due to the disaster, the events that we had, the weather events that we had over the last month. But some of it is clearly because of decreased economic activity.
Well, the economy has slowed down, and is that what you're basing? And as a result of that, the way you've built the revenues for the future, if it doesn't get any better, does that mean another tough, real tough, as opposed to just tough budget for the state?
We were going to have a difficult year to begin with because you look at our sort of what I call our mandated non-discretionary costs, pension growth increase, medical assistance, healthcare costs for the state. corrections, and debt service. Those 4 items alone are growing at about $900 million a year. So they're claiming a sizable share of the new revenues coming into the state, but we also have less revenues coming in right now. So I think we're going to be in for another difficult year. And you know, my crystal ball, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think this is kind of going to be the new normal, as I've been saying, I think, for the next several years, because a lot of economists aren't predicting a turnaround until 2015 or beyond.
Yeah. Well, I had Senator Brubaker on, and he was talking about the pension situation and the fact that the pension payments by the state could reach $1 billion in the next couple years. I also looked recently at the debt. You brought that up, and that will push the debt service almost $1 billion. Am I basically right about that?
Yes. I mean, we're going to pension costs are going to grow. Just the school employee pension costs are going to grow by about $300 million this coming year, from just about $600 million to just over $900 million. That doesn't include
pushing $1 billion in a few years.
It'll be over $1 billion in another year. That doesn't include $200 million in pension cost growth for state employees. So next year alone, we're looking at $500 million in pension cost growth for the Commonwealth.
All right, let's look at it another way. You know, the governors come in and they have an agenda, and there are things they want to do in addition to balance the budget. Does this mean that we're not likely to see new initiatives? One of them that's been talked about is to create a fund for disaster relief. Have the administration taken a look at that? That's a pretty big issue right now, whether there should be a permanent, set-aside allocation of monies to be used. Now, I know you're using the surplus, quote, to help out for the
well, there is no surplus.
Well, go ahead. Explain that.
The governor's already, the governor has authority to reprogram up to $20 million, and for the disasters, he's signed proclamations to release $15 million. Those estimates on costs and the state share are still coming in. I know disaster funding related legislation has been introduced. We're taking a look at it to cost it out. Terry, I really think we're entering what I call sort of a guns and butter era, and that we really don't have any discretionary dollars to reprogram for sort of nice things. I mean, we're looking at paying what we have to pay, and I think in a lot of areas where we're going to have initiatives is going to be based on our creativity, the ability to repurpose existing spending or to recast it in a way that increases efficiency and the effectiveness of those dollars.
All right, we're going to run to break. When we come back, I want to ask you about these policy guidelines, and I guess after looking at them, and you can answer this when we come back, my sense is you're trying to set a whole new dynamic at work. Do I got that about right?
I think you're pretty close on the mark there.
Okay, on the budget process and how departments and agencies should begin to think about it. All right, my guest is Charles Zogby. He's the Budget Secretary of the state. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back to the program with Budget Secretary Charles Zogby. He says we made a little news. We got him to say a few things about the budget. Thanks for that. All right, look, you have these policy guidelines, a new dynamic at work in the overlay of how budgets are prepared and your expectations. Explain that.
Well, the program policy guidelines actually are sort of a revived tradition, as it were. When I was policy director in the Ridge administration, this was something that we routinely did in coordination with the budget office, where we basically give to the agencies the program and fiscal policy guidelines for the coming year, because no sooner do we put the budget to rest at the end of June, but we almost turn around immediately and begin to put together next year's budget, and that takes time. And so really the PPGs, as we call them, are meant to be a broad fiscal and a policy piece to our agencies to try to give them direction for the coming budget
year. So let me
year.
get this straight. So what you're basically doing is saying these are the policies that this administration, the priorities. Your job when you make your recommendations, the departments to you, is to fit their budget considerations into those priorities? Is that the...
Yeah, I mean, think of if you were building a home or remodeling your home, right? You'd start with a budget. You don't want to be planning on money that you can't, the things that you can't
support. Don't ask for things you're not going to get.
That's right. Wants, needs, and desires. And I think this is really, this document is an opportunity for the governor to provide, remind his agencies of his vision, the direction that he wants to go. Okay. And it also lays out, this is the sort of money that we're going to have to support your initiatives.
And what's your consideration when it comes to the discretionary programs where,
Well, again, as I said earlier, I mean, we don't have a lot of, at the margins, we're not going to have a lot of money to program, whether it's in new spending initiatives or tax cuts, which are very much on the governor's agenda. Now, all that will be decided. The budget development process will begin in earnest sort of after the Thanksgiving holiday. The governor will be presenting a new budget in early February of next year. So we have a long way to go, and certainly the economy can change. But there isn't a lot of bright spots on the horizon, and so we need to plan and think about what are going to be those budget priorities that the governor will be advancing next year.
Okay, we have about a minute left. All right, I'm not going to let you off the hook without asking you. Fees and taxes, there's the folks in the legislature sort of waiting. I know you're reviewing the transportation recommendations from the Governor's Commission. Anything new on that?
Well, I think, on the transportation, there's clearly transportation needs out there, right? But the governor's job is to really look at the bigger picture, not just the silo of transportation. Right. And the reality is that we have an economy that's in very difficult times. While we may not have technically a double-dip recession, I think the likelihood is that we are in a stall with economic growth approaching zero, if not negative. And so I think the governor needs to consider that. You look at people hit by the disasters, for instance. They don't have 2 pennies to rub together yet. So we can't ask them for more dollars.
Still to be determined.
To be determined.
All right. Hey, thanks for appearing. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.